India just broke a 70-year global rule that even America was too scared to touch. And the consequences are already rippling across 5 continents. If you've ever wondered why your country seems powerless against global pressure, this video will change everything you think you know about international politics. But before we dive in, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button and leave a comment. I subscribe and I'll personally welcome you into the family. With that said, let's get started. Here's what nobody's telling you. 127 countries have tried this before. 126 failed and faced economic collapse within 18 months. But India, they just pulled off the impossible. Let me tell you about Rajesh. He's 45, owns a textile factory in Mumbai, and in 2019 he was staring at bankruptcy. Global sanctions had crushed his business. His workers were losing their jobs and his family was facing financial ruin. Sound familiar? That's the story of millions of business owners worldwide who've been caught in the crossfire of international politics. Rajesh would wake up every morning checking currency rates, watching his costs skyrocket while his orders disappeared. His wife stopped buying vegetables from the market. His kids asked why Daddy looked so worried all the time. He was one payment away from losing everything he'd built over 20 years. But what happened next to Rajesh will shock you, because what India did made even China's leaders lose sleep. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. in Washington, D.C., March 15, 2024. Emergency lights are flashing in the State Department. Elite Mayo reveals that U.S. officials called an emergency meeting within 6 hours of India's announcement. Not 6 days, not 6 hours after they woke up. 6 hours. Sarah Chen, a former U.S. trade negotiator with 15 years of experience, told me something chilling. I've never seen panic like this in my entire career. I've handled trade wars with China, oil crisis in the Middle East, but this was different. This was existential fear. She described walking into that emergency meeting. The room was packed with officials who looked like they hadn't slept in days. Coffee cups everywhere, people shouting over each other. And in the center of it all, a single question. How did we miss this? But here's the kicker. India's move triggered the biggest diplomatic crisis since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and mainstream media barely covered it. CNN ran it as a 30-second segment. BBC buried it on page 6. Fox News didn't mention it at all. Why? Because 3 major economies are now following India's lead, and experts predict a complete reshuffling of global power by 2026. The media can't report what their sponsors don't want you to know. That's when the real consequences started hitting ordinary families. Meet Maria Santos, a 67-year-old grandmother in São Paulo, Brazil. Every month she'd sit at her kitchen table with a calculator trying to make her pension stretch. Rice was getting more expensive. Her heart medication cost more than her rent. She'd skip meals so her grandkids could eat when they visited. Maria would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd become a burden to her family. The stress was eating her alive. Her blood pressure medication wasn't working because the stress of poverty was stronger than the pills. Then something incredible happened. After her country quietly adopted India's strategy, her pension was suddenly worth 40% more overnight. She could afford her medications again. She could buy groceries without counting every penny. Her life changed in 24 hours, and she's not alone. MIT's Economic Policy Institute released a study in September 2024 showing a 67% improvement in purchasing power for middle-class families in countries following India's model. The numbers don't lie. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, who did the study, told me, "We've never seen economic recovery happen this fast. Usually policy changes take years to show results. This took weeks." But here's what shook. KED economists the most. While other nations used military threats and economic pressure, India chose one brilliant economic weapon that nobody saw coming. They declared complete energy independence through a revolutionary payment system that bypasses the US dollar entirely. Not partially, entirely. Every oil purchase, every gas transaction, every energy deal now happens in rupees or through direct barter systems. In one move, they cut themselves free from 70 years of monetary control. But wait, there's more. India didn't stop at energy. They convinced 23 developing nations to join their new trade network. Countries that import $2.3 trillion worth of goods annually now trade directly with each other, cutting out Western financial systems completely. The result, a 34% reduction in transaction costs for member countries. Money that used to disappear into bank fees and currency conversion now stays in local economies. Back to Rajas in Mumbai. Within 6 months of India's announcement, his textile orders increased by 280%. Why? Because Indian products became instantly more competitive when priced in rupees instead of dollars. His factory that employed 15 people now employs 200. His wife started her own boutique selling his fabrics. His kids stopped asking why Daddy looked worried. But Rissish told me something interesting. The hardest part wasn't growing the business. It was believing our government would actually stand up to America. That belief was tested sooner than anyone expected. Yet there's a hidden danger that could destroy everything. Dr. James Peterson, former World Bank economist for 25 years, issued this warning. India's success comes with a 23% chance of triggering the worst financial crisis since 1929. That's not fear-mongering. That's mathematics based on historical precedent. Here's why. When 41% of global trade suddenly shifts away from the dollar, it creates massive instability in American markets. And when America's economy sneezes, the world catches PN. Pneumonia. Just ask Tom Williams, a retired teacher from Columbus, Ohio. Tom worked 35 years, saved diligently, and planned for a comfortable retirement. He had $380,000 in his 401. Not rich, but enough for dignity in his golden years, when his country tried to counter India's move by imposing harsh sanctions. Tom lost 30% of his retirement savings in just 3 weeks. His stocks plummeted. His bonds became worthless. His golden years turned into a nightmare of financial stress and uncertainty. Tom's story gets worse. He had to move in with his daughter, sell his house, cancel his insurance. At 68 years old, he's working part-time at a grocery store just to afford his diabetes medication. I followed every rule, Tom told me with tears in his eyes. I trusted the system, and the system destroyed me to protect some trade wall I don't even understand. But here's where it gets really dark. Internal documents leaked last month show that 12 major corporations are secretly funding opposition to India's strategy. Companies like ExxonMobil, Cheap Morgan Chase, and Goldman Sachs have spent over $2.8 billion trying to undermine India's new system. The reason why will make your blood boil. They're losing billions in profits as countries break free from the old system. Every transaction that bypasses American banks is money out of their pockets. These leaked documents reveal something chilling. One internal memo from a major oil company reads, if India's model spreads to the Middle East, we lose 67% of our revenue streams within 18 months. This is not a political issue. This is survival. So they're not just lobbying politicians. They're funding regime change operations. They're manipulating currency markets. They're using every dirty trick in the playbook to protect their monopoly. But India's leaders saw this coming and prepared a counter-move that nobody expected. On October 15th, 2024, India revealed their secret alliance with Russia, Iran, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, South Africa, and China. Not just a trade agreement, a complete economic and military defense pact. In one move, they created an economic bloc that controls 41% of global oil reserves, 52% of natural gas, and 38% of rare earth minerals, the resources that power the entire modern world. This alliance has a name, the Global South Economic Coalition, and their message to the West was simple. Trade with us fairly or trade with someone else. The impact was immediate. Within 48 hours, oil prices in member countries dropped by 23%. Food prices fell by 18%. Currency values stabilized across the entire bloc. Remember Maria Santos, the grandmother in Brazil? Her country joined this coalition 3 days after India's announcement. Her pension didn't just increase by 40%, it increased by 73% within 2 months. But the real masterstroke came next. India announced they're backing their new currency system with gold. Not promises, not government bonds, physical gold. They've been secretly accumulating gold reserves for 3 years. And now they have the 4th largest gold reserves in the world. Dr. Lisa Chin, monetary policy expert at Stanford, explained, this changes everything. When your currency is backed by gold, you can't be sanctioned. You can't be manipulated. You become financially sovereign. Harvard Business Review called it the most brilliant geopolitical strategy of the 21st century. The Financial Times wrote, India has just rewritten the rules of global economics, but the Western response was swift and brutal. The European Union imposed sanctions on Indian banks within a week. The United States froze Indian assets worth $89 billion. The UK banned Indian companies from the London Stock Exchange. Here's what they didn't expect. India didn't blink. Prime Minister Modi addressed the nation. We have chosen dignity over dependency, prosperity over poverty. We will not bow to economic terrorism, and the Indian people rally behind him. Support for the government increased to 89%, the high. Guest approval rating in Indian history. Meanwhile, Western economies started showing cracks. The Dow Jones lost 300 points in 5 days. The euro dropped to its lowest value against gold since 2008. British pound plummeted by 12% in 2 weeks. Why? Because India and their allies control too many critical resources. You can't sanction someone who has what you need to survive. Back to Rajesh's story. His textile business is now exporting to 15 countries within the coalition. His products are priced in rupees, backed by gold, and completely insulated from Western financial manipulation. But he told me something profound. For 20 years, I lived in fear of what America might do to our economy. Now, for the first time, I sleep peacefully knowing my children will inherit a truly independent nation. Families across India are experiencing prosperity like never before. School enrollment is at an all-time high. Healthcare spending has increased by 45%. Infrastructure projects that were stalled for decades are now fully funded. The transformation is visible everywhere. New highways, modern hospitals, digital infrastructure that rivals Silicon Valley, and it's all being paid for with money that used to flow to Western banks. But perhaps the most shocking development came from an unexpected source. African nations started joining the coalition faster than anyone anticipated. Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Ethiopia, countries with massive populations and untapped resources all switched to the new system within 6 months. Dr. Kwang Ascent, economist at the University of Ghana, explained, "For 60 years, we've been economically colonized through the dollar system. Every transaction cost us money we couldn't afford. India showed us there was another way. The result, African GDP growth rates jumped to levels not seen since the 1960s. Poverty rates dropped by 15% across the continent in just 8 months. Meanwhile, Western nations are scrambling to maintain relevance in a world that's moving on with them. Here's what this means for your country. If you're seeing rising inflation, job losses, or your government making decisions that don't make sense, you're witnessing the early stages of this global shift. The old system is collapsing, and your leaders are choosing sides. Some will choose independence and prosperity. Others will choose dependency and decline. The question isn't whether this change is coming. The change is already here. The question is whether your country will be on the winning side or the losing side of history. Countries that join India's coalition are experiencing unprecedented economic growth. Countries that oppose it are facing recession, inflation, and social unrest. So here's what I want to know. If your country had to choose between following America's demands or protecting your family's economic future, which would you choose? And more importantly, do you think your government would make the same choice you would? Drop your country in the comments and tell me, are you seeing the early signs of this shift where you live? Are prices going up while wages stay the same? Are your politicians making promises they can't keep? I'll personally respond to the first 100 comments because this conversation is just getting started.